University resides within the traditional homelands of the Spokane people and other tribes who are connected through their shared history of this region. The land holds their cultural DNA, and it is their ancestors who are here and bring forth the knowledge of this place, the knowledge that comes from the land.
Thank you, Erin. One announcement, the students in Dr. O's classes, please wait to the end of the program and your extra credit forms will be signed in the back of the room. 3 months ago, I was reading the Spokesman Review in June and came across an article written by Stephanie Hammett entitled "Blackish, Writer, Now Living in Spokane, Receives His 9th Emmy Nomination." As a fan of Blackish, I devoured that article and immediately contacted our provost, Dr. Brian Levinskovich, regarding the possibility of featuring Mr. Horsted for a campus conversation co-sponsored by our respective offices. The provost agreed, as did President May. I reached out to the newspaper and made contact with Eric. With the support of Dr. Pete Porter, Chair, Fine and Performing Arts, the Africana Studies Department, Marilyn Dreiss, Kim Davis, and Nick Palmieri and staff, yesterday's dream of having a campus conversation featuring Eric Horsted is today's reality. I am thrilled Eric is here to share his background, career journey, extraordinary success, and advice for aspiring writers. Our program format this afternoon is interview style. It is my pleasure to introduce our interview panelists, followed by introduction of our speaker. Angela Schwindeman. Professor Schwindeman is currently the Faculty Commons Director at Eastern Washington University and Interim Director in Africana Studies. She teaches courses in African American culture, history, family, film, and social and intellectual thought. She's edited and published the textbook, Readings in African American Culture, Resistance, Liberation, and Identity from the 1600s to the 21st century. Professor Schwindeman researches and presents lectures on topics related to defining and redefining Blackness and Black identity, culture, gender, and film. Malcolm Pellis. Malcolm Pellis is a screenwriter, playwright, and professor. He currently serves as Equity Chair for Washington FilmWorks. He has written scripts for CBS Entertainment, the National Football League, Game Loft, and the United States Army. His plays have been performed off-Broadway in New York City and in Washington, D.C. at such places as the Kennedy Center. Malcolm has an MFA degree from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts and an undergraduate degree from Florida State University. Gracia Alzaber. Gracia was born in Beirut, Lebanon, and raised in the greater Seattle area, and is currently a senior double majoring in psychology and Africana studies. Gracia hopes to work with low-income, marginalized communities struggling with mental health and trauma. Gracia has served as Black Student Union President since 2018, with a focus on re-education about what it means to be Black in America and reclaiming Black excellence. Gracia strives to create a unified campus while showcasing the importance of representation and inclusion. Thank you to our panelists. Eric Horsted grew up in the rough and tumble suburbs of Houston, Texas, where his passions included sitting near an air conditioner and watching television. Later, he attended the University of Texas in Austin, where he focused on filmmaking and minored in watching television. After graduation, he stuffed his belongings in a trash bag and hopped on a freight train bound for LA. In the years since, he's written or helped produce well over 400 episodes of television, including such series as Coach, Home Improvement, Futurama, Reba, The Boondocks, The Simpsons, Disenchantment, Alexa and Katie, Blackish, and lots of shows that were canceled so quickly no one remembers them. After many, many years in Los Angeles, Eric recently hopped on a freight train bound for Spokane, where he lives now with his husband and their 3 somewhat well-behaved children. Together, the family enjoys the beauty of the inland Northwest and watching television. Please join me in a huge welcome for Eric Horsted.
All right, so I'll start us off. Eric, just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, as my thrilling bio recounted, I grew up in Houston, and then went on to college in Austin, and kind of hung out for a while. It's you know, when you live in a place that's not a funnel to Hollywood, sometimes you feel like moving to LA is a terrifying endeavor that, you know, can't be done. So it took me a while to sort of get up my courage to make the move, and part of what helped was working on local productions, or productions that would come to town and shoot in Austin. There were, you know, a variety of commercials and some made-for-TV movies and stuff. And people were always very encouraging, and I finally worked on this one and got to know a producer and the director decently, and they said, look, you're not going to achieve what you're dreaming of doing staying here. And that still wasn't enough to motivate me, but luckily when the production ended and they went back to LA, they got this development deal with a big production company, and they called me and said, look, you said you wanted to move to LA. If you want to come make our coffee and, you know, vacuum our offices, you've got a job. So I made the move, and it was worth it. It was a good move. So don't be afraid. You can always come back. If LA's not for you.
Okay. Why the interest in moving to Spokane from LA?
Well, let me have another swig of my vodka here. Hold on. My husband and I have always loved Washington, and you know, we're two men married and raising a family, so there's certain geographic areas of the United States that are just sort of off limits. You know, you're like, the South is kind of out. Certain states are just disqualified immediately. So we sort of just landed on, basically the West Coast was kind of somewhere in the West Coast, and we went to places that just kind of had a slower pace and lower expenses. You know, as we get older and nearing, you know, retirement and whatnot, you don't want to be shelling out zillions of dollars just to have a roof over your head. So initially we were thinking of Western Washington, Seattle area, and this was a very long-term planning thing, and over that time, several members of my husband's family ended up moving to Spokane, so we started visiting and seeing sort of the charm and the potential, and it just had a lot of the things that we were looking for, and so we decided to pull the trigger. And then we bought a house, and then we're starting to work on fixing it up, and during the pandemic we finally pulled the trigger and made the move. So we've been here a little over a year.
Oh, wow.
Cool. Lucky for us. So how did you start writing?
Well, as I mentioned, when I came to LA, I was basically just being an assistant and answering phones and making coffee and doing all that sort of exotic stuff. But luckily, as part of my job, I eventually had to read scripts and do like little criticisms and analysis for the producers I was working for. And when I moved to LA, I was thinking, oh, I want to write movies because, you know, that's where the really interesting stuff is. But the more scripts I read, the more I was like, movies are just enormous and they're really hard to do well. And every time I would read a sitcom script, I would be like, I could do better than that. This is, I mean, come on. And I realized, you know, I grew up just ingesting television at such a, you know, ridiculous rate that it was really something I fully understood, and I felt like my sense of humor and just sort of my approach to life lended itself to comedy and sitcoms. So I realized, okay, well, that's my path then. And so while I was doing that job, I guess it was like toward the end of that job, which was only about a year, those producers' deal ended, and so I had to find another job. So I was like, all right, I got to find an assistant job on a sitcom. And so I weaseled around and sent out a bunch of resumes and ended up getting a job on this sitcom that really is kind of where it all turned around. I got a job as the PA, production assistant. I don't know if we know that term, PA, write that down, in the writer's bungalow. So I was like getting lunches for the writers and, you know, refilling their printers, and oh, it was very, very exotic. I learned a lot of very important information. But it put me in proximity to these people that were so brilliant and so funny and well-read and all the things I wanted to be but was too lazy to be. And just over time, I felt like, oh my God, I feel like I've finally met my tribe. This is what I aspire to be. And so during that job, I wrote my first sample script, and I showed it to some of the writers that I had become friends with, and they were like, you know, this is actually really good. I'll show this to my agent. So two of them sent my script to their different agents, and I had meetings with both of them, and I actually got to choose between those two agents, and that sort of got the ball rolling. And not long after that, I got my first job working on Coach, which was a TV show in the olden days.
Who were some of your comedy influences, writers, comedians?
Well, when I was a kid, there were so many great TV shows. Norman Lear was a big TV producer that did like All in the Family and The Jeffersons and just a ton of really solid, really great shows. And there were other shows like The Mary Tyler Moore Show and The Bob Newhart Show that were part of this other company called MTM that made all these very smart urban comedies. And then, like in terms of present day comedians and comic influences, I mean, David Letterman, he's not really present day, but when I was like in college and stuff, I worshiped David Letterman because he was just so quick and so, you know, off the wall sometimes. But I think Conan is a really good carrier of that torch, although he's now retiring. But there's a lot of other, I mean, obviously Dave Chappelle and Tig Notaro and who else? Patty Harrison, look her up, she's hilarious if you don't know who she is. Really funny.
How do you start the writing process for your shows?
Well, when working on a show, it's a super collaborative process. Usually there's anywhere from 7 to 15 writers on a show. So it's very much driven by what's called the showrunner, who is sort of like really like in the film, a director is like the auteur that decides, you know, what the tone and the feel of the thing is. And in TV, and specifically in TV comedy, the showrunner really sets the tone and makes all the big decisions. So if you're not the showrunner, you're trying to come up with ideas that will appeal to the showrunner and fit with the show. And so at the beginning of the season, there's a lot of just pitching of ideas about what the season is about, and usually there's some sort of arc for the season. I'm sure you guys have noticed that on shows. Sometimes there's a continuing story, and increasingly now with streaming, there's a lot more of that sort of continuous story as opposed to each episode being a separate, sealed little tale. So anyway, you try to figure out what that big arc is and try to come up with some specific stories that will get you in that path. And anyway, it's just a lot of discussions and getting to know your new coworkers, and it's a really fun process. And it could be really hard work and long hours, but it's overall, it beats coal mining, I would have to say.
All right, so describe a typical day in the life of a writer for us.
Maybe I'll do that in a couple different versions of writing. So like, do you guys know what like a multicam sitcom? Do you know the difference between the different sitcoms? So a multicam sitcom, obviously, it's a live audience, multiple cameras recording it. So it's in a typical day on a multicam show. I'll kind of lay out the week generally because it's kind of interesting how it's really like putting on a play, and which is one of the things I love about multicams because it's got a really nice build to it. So you start out on Monday generally, and you have the table read, and you've already written the script. It's already one of the writers wrote the script. The whole writing staff has rewritten the script. The showrunner is given, their guidance on how to improve the story and strengthen the emotional beats and punch up the jokes. And so by Monday, it's perfect. It's beautiful. And then the actors read it at the table read, first thing on Monday, with all the producers and the network people. And all the actors just sit around the table with all the producers and writers and network people, and you hear it out loud for the first time. So that gives you the impression of how it's holding up as a story, what jokes are landing, what's confusing, that sort of stuff. And then you may also get actor input, which sometimes is welcome and sometimes is a nightmare. But, they're the ones that have to portray it, so it's important to listen, and oftentimes it ends up getting better. And then you get the network input and the studio input, and again, the showrunner filters all that into action, and determines what changes need to be made. So that's the table read day. All the writers go back, you start making the changes and doing the work that needs to be done. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, you have run-throughs, and it's kind of the same process. You go down to the stage, you see it on its feet. The director has got the actors up doing their moves, and the blocking is there. And it's really fun to see it kind of take shape. And again, based on what you're seeing, you do another rewrite and figure out, oh, this dramatic scene is not working. Maybe this character doesn't need to be there. Maybe we streamline it, whatever. And so you do that Tuesday and Wednesday. And then generally, it's pretty much set by then. And on Thursday, it's just kind of a technical day on stage where the cameras come in, they start blocking all the camera moves and the camera positions. The actors really nail down their lines. And then on Friday, it's showtime, and it's so fun. You get to go have a dinner in some cramped, cold, weird, musty old stage, and then you go into the stage where they're filming the show, and there's a live audience there that probably knows the show, and maybe some super fans that are really excited to be there. And anyway, it's just really fun. The actors are always at their best because the attention of the crowd is so electrifying, and so if it all goes well, at the end of the night, you've got a really solid episode of television in the can, and you're good to go. So that's the multicam. Maybe I'll just contrast that with when you're not working and you're writing on your own, when you're not working on a job, then it's a lot less fun. I'll be honest, because it's all about your own mental state and your own motivation. So you really have to stay focused and stay organized and really push yourself to do the work. And it's not fun all the time. All right, it's almost never fun. But the funnest thing about writing is having written. Once you actually get it down, you can always make it better. So the important thing is just charge ahead, just get some stuff on paper. You can always make it better. Nobody writes brilliant stuff, off the cuff. It takes revision and work and focus. And so anyway, that's my long-winded answer to whatever the question was that I didn't.
How do you know when a script's ready?
When it's about an hour after it was due. That's if you are writing for a job or a show, but I would say if you get to the point where you feel like you're starting to tear stuff out that is working perfectly just because you're bored with it, because you've read it 50 times, it's probably time to quit and just get somebody else's input. And that's always, it's great to before you send it off to, whoever the, job or agent or whatever, get other people's input, because, you never know what holes you're missing, There's things that make perfect sense to you that are a logic leap for everybody else. So it's always good to get a second or third opinion from others you respect.
Okay. So Blackish is a huge hit. I'm a fan. But is your writing process different when you have to write for like African Americans or other diverse like casts?
It's more or less the same. Obviously, all characters you write for are different in various ways. And, when you're writing for someone, like writing for basically an all-black cast, like on that show, obviously my life experience and their life experience has major differences. And that's when having a writing staff that you work with is really essential, because, the Blackish writing staff was, I would say, over 50% black, and some of the most talented, smartest people I've ever worked with. Just an incredible bunch of writers. And that's when you're really glad to have a staff, because they've lived the life, they know the experiences, and luckily, by the time the script is all worked out, and the stories are kind of worked out in the group at the direction of the showrunner. So it's sort of already got a lot of the main emotional beats, and the real tone is already there. So you're just kind of filling in the blanks with some jokes and dialogue and things of that nature. So it was very daunting when I first started on the show, because I felt like, oh my God, this is not my life experience.
Right.
How am I going to possibly do this? And Blackish in particular is really run in a unique way. The showrunner has, and this was started from the show's creator originally, there's just days of discussion about people's personal lives in the room, and the writers just talk about things they've gone through, or issues they've had, and it's very detailed personal things, and tons of them end up in the show because they're real, and that's how you get to see something that's like really rings true. So for the first, I would say, week and a half, maybe even 2 weeks of the show, I don't think I said anything, because I was so like, oh my God. We were like pitching out the new season, and things did not line up with my experience, and what can I contribute, really? Mm-hmm. And I could find places where there were sort of some intersections, but, and I was talking to my friend who was the co-showrunner, and she was like, believe me, not speaking in some cases is as good as speaking, because they've had people in the past that just want to hear themselves, and whether or not it's helpful did not occur to them. They were just, I need to hear myself talk. So anyway, that's I guess a good lesson to take out of that is, sometimes it's better not to speak if you don't really have something germane to the topic.
Okay. So you've worked on a number of very successful shows. Which one do you think has been the most challenging for you as a writer?
Probably Futurama. When I started on it, it was just getting started. There was no pilot script, and it was my first animated show. I'd only worked on live-action, multicam sitcoms prior to that, and it was also, sort of seen as a spin-off of The Simpsons, which was, obviously a behemoth, and it was Matt Groening's second show, And I loved The Simpsons so much, and I loved what I had seen of Futurama, which was very sketchy, just some character designs and basic ideas of the show. So it ended up being just the most insane amount of work I had ever experienced. It was 7 days a week. It was, I mean, anywhere from 10 to 14 hours a day. I mean, I think we worked 31 days straight at one point before we had a day off. It was incredibly grueling. And, oh, also, I was like a bumpkin from Houston, and I was working in a room where every other writer had gone to Harvard. Several of them had PhDs in like crazy, like in chemistry or like electrical engineering, and I was like, okay, I'll be over here reading People magazine. But it's just still a phenomenal group of people, and hilarious and brilliant, and eventually I, overcame my terror and made a contribution, and that was it was physically grueling, but ultimately very worth it, and I was just thrilled to be there, even though the hours were terrible. I was like, this is just exciting to be building something from the ground up, because I had not experienced that before.
So you worked on a lot of shows. What show or what shows have been the most satisfying to work on, and why?
Well, Futurama, because of the, building it from the ground up, that whole experience, and just I was really proud of the show, and it felt like it was a show I would watch, which isn't always the case. You work on shows and you write for them and you're thrilled to be there, but like often you're watching it and you're like, okay, this is fine, but it's not something I would choose to watch if I weren't involved. So that was the first time I'd really felt, all right, this is my kind of show. But I think it's kind of a split decision on this question, because I think Blackish was just such a unique experience for me, and I was so proud to be associated with a show that was not just entertaining, but I felt like it's actually important, and it's a rare show on network television. So those were kind of my two big ones, I'd say.
What would you say is your greatest strength as a writer?
Well, do I have to pick just one? Jeez. I don't know. It's kind of a mixture, I would say, of so much of being a writer is being someone that you want to be trapped in a room with for 12 hours a day. I mean, people who are bristly and rude, or frankly not great smelling. Sometimes they don't last in the industry super long, because really those are kind of like skills you need. Bathing, that's in there. So being pleasant to be around and being positive is a big plus, and I think that's been very helpful to me in managing to trick Hollywood into hiring me for these many, many decades.
But you kind of,
Oh, I jumped into the next one?
well, I was going to inquire what kind of skill sets
Oh.
that writers need, but you mentioned bathing. So.
Bathing, that's really the top. That's the top one. Yeah, I mean, but just also dedication and hard work. I mean, there's times when you're in a crunch and the showrunner's like, look, I know this sucks, but we need a new script for Monday, and it's Friday, and why don't you take a pass at it? And so you have to kill your weekend and work, 18 hours a day for 2 days in a row just to try to crank out a script. And so you got to be a team player. You've got to take the assignments with a smile on your face, and be happy to get to work, because you're in the end, you're lucky to be there. It's like there's a lot of people that would love to have that job, and it is, like I said, it is not back-breaking, brutal work. It's fun when you get down to it. So I don't know. Did I answer the question? I know I talked a lot.
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
This is the last season of Blackish. What's next for you?
Well, that's a very good question. There's a couple of kind of bubbling possibilities out there that I won't go into, and I'm working on a pilot idea right now, and so I mean we'll see what happens. It's unclear, it's unknown. Hopefully, it will all be clear soon.
Okay, so you're just like going with the flow with it.
What's that?
You're just going with the flow.
Oh, I never do that. I'm a basket case most of the time.
Okay.
But that is the writer's life. It's, you know, you're not in charge of your destiny when you're basically going from job to job. So it's, you know, that's the drag of it. I would love to get on some show and just be on it for 10 years, theoretically. I'm sure once I got in there. I mean, this is an interesting story. The Simpsons, obviously, has been on the air for 30 some odd years now, and there are so many writers on that show that have been there for decades. I mean, I don't know how many are there from the very beginning. I mean, there's a couple. But that's its own kind of misery, I would have to say. Even though it's a great show, and I mean, what a joy to have that kind of solid employment and residuals and all that stuff. But, you know, there's got to be a middle ground because you sort of lose the spontaneity and the joy of it when it's like, oh, sorry, we did that. Nope, we did that. I mean, that show has done, I don't even know, 700 and something episodes, maybe 800 episodes. So the one episode that I wrote was about Marge going to prison, and it was the second Marge going to prison episode that the show has done. So I look forward to seeing the third someday.
So we all know that Hollywood is pretty competitive, but what would you say is your biggest attribute to your 25-year-long career?
Well, I mean, I think it's, like I was saying before, it's kind of a number of things, but I think writing really solid drafts, you know, like nothing is a more instant killing of your career than consistently turning in kind of lazy drafts that don't surprise or, you know, that don't have some really solid, unexpected jokes. So that's one thing, solid drafts. Pleasant to be around for the most part. I try to keep all my panic attacks at home. And what was the third thing? Oh, bathing, yes.
Seems to be a high priority.
It's very high.
There.
It's, I'm sure in academia that's important as well.
So what do you consider your greatest professional achievement?
Really just managing to keep the career going as long as it has. I mean, when I started, I always figured I would be done by 40 or something, and I've managed to outlast that and still chugging along. So that's kind of, I think that's my most impressive achievement. So.
What advice would you give students who are interested in a writing career?
Well, I think probably the most important thing is just to write. Just write every day. I mean, if you're really methodical about it and, you know, set a time every day that you're like, okay, every day I'm going to sit down at this time and I'm going to write and make it a set amount of time. So even if it's 15 minutes, whatever it is, just do it and do it religiously. And it may feel like a chore at first, but if you're cranking things out, eventually something will really strike you and you'll be like, oh, I'm going to explore that further. And you know, the next day, and eventually it's not a chore. It's an exciting exploration and a discovery of talents you didn't know you had. And so that's really the main thing. And also just by virtue of writing more and more and more, like every script you write when you're starting out is leap years ahead of what you wrote previously. I mean, the learning curve is so high. So just write. And believe me, this is advice that I do not take myself. I'm lazy and I'm distracted and my children are loud. And so I don't do enough writing, but I know that is the key.
So we hear you're interested in becoming a professor. What is the appeal in higher education?
Well, it's a number of things. Like, I feel like, you know, like I said, I've sort of on the upper end of the age for writing comedy, and you know, comedy evolves, and it's always changing, and you know, being able to appeal to young TV viewers is increasingly difficult, as I don't know any of the references, or I don't know what's going on in the world. You know, I feel like it's time, you know, or it will be time, I'm still clinging. Eventually, it'll be time to step aside and let some young Turk fill my spot. And, you know, I feel like I've spoken to writing classes and things in the past, and it's always nice to realize when you're speaking that there are actually things you know that are valuable to people because they haven't had the experiences that I've had and whatnot. So it's nice to be able to share that information and hopefully help new generations of writers get out there, and especially in a place like Eastern Washington, where, you know, it's not really a pipeline to Hollywood. So I'm glad to be here and sort of help people realize it can be done. I wasn't from Hollywood, I had zero connections. If you really work hard and you have talent, you can achieve great stuff.
So I have a final question here, but I think you might have alluded to it a little bit in your work habits, writing
Oh, yeah.
habits, and how much writing you did during COVID. But if you would, if that doesn't appeal to you, I think it might be interesting to hear the difference between the collaborative writing experience and the individual.
Oh, yeah. Well, collaboration is really amazing. If you can, in television, there's actually a lot of people who are writing teams. It's like a pair of people. You've probably seen it in the credits, you know, screenplay by, or whatever, you know, teleplay by blank and blank. And it's people who actually work together as you know, they're paid as a single unit. So unfortunately, you do have to split the money. But it's an automatic sounding board for everything you write. I mean, I've written a few scripts that way on TV shows just when there was a fast turnaround and you had to kind of crank it out. And it's not a bad way to get started, because just having that collaboration and having that sounding board really helps you make progress. And also you have to deliver for your writing partner, which is helpful, I find, as I mentioned, a lazy person. So that sort of relationship and that energy of that is sort of similar to the writing staff of a TV show. You know, that's just that collaboration between the entire staff is incredibly helpful. And you've always got, you know, this room of people to bounce things off of, which is great. When you're writing alone, it is more of a challenge. You really have to stay dedicated and on task and on focus, and it's important to set deadlines for yourself, much like you would have if you were working on a show, because otherwise time just has a way of slipping by, and before you know it, COVID is over and you have nothing to show for it. Anyway, that's my rambling answer that I hope answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Clark, I think we'll turn it over.
We just wanted to have an opportunity to take questions from the audience. Should I bring the mic down to people? Would that be best? Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Did you want to say anything before I do that?
I did want to acknowledge our incredible panelists and our fantastic featured speaker. Thank you all so much.
Okay, so if you'll give me a hand raise for questions. Okay, I'm going to start here since you're closest. I'll hold it.
Okay.
We don't have to worry about COVID.
So Futurama is one of my favorite shows, especially the episodes that were nominated for the Primetime Emmys, especially the late Philip J. Fry and Jurassic Park. I was wondering, for any of those episodes, if you would rewrite them if you could, and if so, in what way? If you have anything with the benefit of hindsight that you would add.
Anything with the what?
Benefit of hindsight.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. I feel like they're so like solidified in time. I kind of feel like it would be a shame to change anything. I don't know.
If that question is a basic no, then I have a backup, which is what's one skill that you kind of took a long time to develop in writing? You know, some people take a long time to maybe understand dialogue or comedy.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great question. It is true that like people sort of, writers in television tend to get branded as story people, or they're joke people, or they're, you know, punch up people, whatever, that sort of thing. And probably my weak area was story. Like pitching out a story just takes me forever, and I will pitch out the beats, and then I'll start writing it, and then I'll realize this ending does not work. I've got to change the beginning to set up a different ending. And anyway, it's a much more torturous process. But man, people that are good at story are just like, oh, I got it, ding, 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 and they just like pitch it out, and it's a miracle. And then you get people like David X. Cohen of Futurama, who is phenomenal at story, and he's hilarious. And those are the people that you just want to punch because they've got it all, and that's not fair.
Okay, we had another question right here.
Yeah, so I got a question. So you're a writer, and you say you took a big risk. You hopped on a train, went to LA. I was just wondering, were you ever like nervous, scared, discouraged, or how do you stay focused and motivated to keep on going?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've had a long career, but I've also had periods of unemployment, and it is very difficult not to get discouraged. And you just gotta make yourself keep pushing. I mean, you gotta make use of your friendships that you've made in the business, if you've got them, and let people know that you're not working, and let people know that you would love to work on their show, no matter how awful it is. You gotta just say yes. I mean, you can't have too high of standards. I mean, as my bio said, that I've worked on a lot of shows that were. I mean, I worked on a show that was about two guys with the same hairstyle. So it didn't last. So yeah, it can be very discouraging, but you have to get up every day and open the laptop and try to crank something out. And like I said, if you just keep doing that, eventually you'll catch on something and you'll get excited about it all over again.
Hi, Eric.
Hello.
So I've been dying to know, it's kind of not like a writing question, but have you met Reba? Or who's the most famous person you've met?
Well, I mean, really any actor that's worked on a show that I worked on, I've met, because you're down, the live action shows I've worked on, we're on stage with the actors 4 or 5 days a week. You're interacting with them at the cast, whatever, the Christmas parties and the whatever. The weirdest version of that is the COVID year on Blackish, because I've only met that cast on Zoom. So I was the new guy last year, and so it was like weird to be talking to Tracy Ellis Ross and her going, so what do you like to do? Do you have plants? Do you have pets? And anyway, it's just kind of a surreal, surreal experience. But yeah, I mean, celebrities are just like regular folk, just have more money and better plastic surgery. Yeah. That's a yes on Reba. Yeah. Yeah, she was a really interesting person. She was very professional. She was incredibly professional, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
A question, if you know, what's the backstory behind the title Blackish? How was that approved or considered okay to use? Who collaborated and approved that? And then are there issues of race and politics that are considered a landmine, and how is that collaborated upon to not do it or not go there?
Those are good questions. Unfortunately, I don't really know that much about it. The title and the show was created long before I was a part of it. So, I mean, I think it was just sort of a play on the idea of, you know, a guy who's from, you know, an urban, rough environment, and he's raising these kids in this affluent world, and he feels like his family has just become blackish, but not fully black like he once was. Or, 10 minutes? Is that me? Okay. Luckily, I don't know that much about these questions. So, and the second, what was, about politics. I don't know. There was that one Donald Trump episode of Blackish that the network did not air, that Kenya Barris, the creator of Blackish, wrote, and ABC would not air it, and it was during the Disney acquisition of 20th Century Fox, and I think, well, the commonly held belief, at least in some quarters, is that Disney just didn't want to ruffle feathers in the government, and that would possibly crack down on that sort of antitrust merger, and so they deep-sixed the Donald Trump episode, and then they did air it on Hulu fairly recently, maybe a year ago. They dropped it on Hulu, but it was old news by then. I mean, it was a 2 or 3-year-old, 4-year-old episode, and you watch it and you're like, all right, well, it's pretty clear that it's criticizing, you know, Donald Trump as president, but it's, I don't know, it wasn't that incendiary, but, you know, who knows?
Thank you for coming in today, Eric. My question really aims to take advantage of your long history in Hollywood as a writer. In your experience, has the diversity in the writer room improved? And if so, how can we even improve it more?
It's definitely improved. And I would say it had nowhere to go but up, because it was pretty abysmal when I started. I mean, I'm not sure, I can't really remember what the first room I had that had a person of color in it. I mean, it took years and years and years. And I was never, I've only been in the position of hiring writers on one show. And so I tried to definitely have a room that looked a little bit more like America. But it's definitely getting better. There's definitely a much more conscious effort. And I think it starts with hiring support staff and crews, and, you know, just trying to get more people of color into those positions, and just building experience and getting them into the pipeline to flourish on all levels of productions.
Hi, so I'm a huge fan of Futurama, and I just grew up on watching it. And I was just wondering, what was one of your favorite episodes to write and like see the final product actually come out?
That's a good question. I would say probably off the cuff, my two favorites are probably War is the H Word, and that was a pretty early one. Towards the end of the run, what's it called? Oh, The Birds and the Bots, where Bender becomes a father. That one that had some really sweet, surprising moments for Bender, and then a big twist at the end.
Do you ever get frustrated when you have a family member or like your husband watch a show that you've written on and you have to watch it again after going through the writing process?
That's a good question. No, I mean, it's, you know, often I don't watch the final cuts of things, and so, I mean, unless I've already seen it, like if it's a show an episode I've written, I've probably seen the edits and, you know, been involved in that whole process, but I don't know. It's luckily, being a comedy writer, it's only 22 minutes of my time, so it's, and if anyone laughs at something I wrote, then I can really, you know, just bask in that pride and brag about it, so that's nice.
Usually in TV writing, you kind of have to do a good portion of genres from doing a slasher TV show, then automatically somehow going into a Hallmark film about a woman in Luxembourg trying to find her intuition or something like that. So how hard is it to initially get that process going to go into a different direction of genre like Futurama to Blackish?
That's a good question. I think, I don't know. It's, when you boil it down, I mean, Futurama was kind of a weird beast because it was about the future and there was a lot of elements that were just sort of not of our world. So that kind of had a learning curve. But I mean, in general, you're telling stories that are very human and that sort of boil down to very similar themes and conflicts. And so it's not a huge range. I mean, like you said, if I had to write a slasher movie, that would be a giant stretch for me, and I probably would not. I'd probably just run away. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason people sort of end up writing one kind of thing, and that becomes their specialty. So.
Hey, we're going to take one last question. I saw a hand up here.
Hi. Well, I'm a huge Simpsons fan, so I wanted to know how it was like working for the Simpsons. And I've been to the Fox Studios in LA by Santa Monica, and when I went, they told us that in the office, that's where it's supposed to be. Is it true you guys worked there, or was it just like a make-up story just to fool us?
Was it do you remember what the building looked like? Was it kind of
Yeah,
like
it's
an ugly building with a fountain in the middle?
Yeah, and Psycho Bob in there, and Krusty the Clown.
What?
Krusty the Clown and Psycho Bob. It was in LA, the Fox Studio.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably it. Did they have the big hand with the donut? Was that there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That is where, some of the writers work in that building, and then right across the parking lot from that other one that has the fountain, that's like where most of the writers are for that. I mean, I didn't work on the show. I wrote one episode freelance. But I've hung out around with those writers and stuff because of Futurama and The Simpsons kind of being like siblings. And it's a bunch of really interesting, cool people, very, very quirky. And like I said, they've been working there a long time, so they've all settled in and they're very comfortable just being themselves, which is kind of fun.
Well, thank you so much. We'd love to give you a round of applause for our star. We're going to call you a star because you're big time to us. And our panel from EWU. So please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom. And, you know, if you want to be faculty, we have connections around here. So anyway, thank you so much. And for those of you who are in Dr. O's classes, the sign-up sheets are at the back of the room for you. So anyway, thank you all. Have a great day. Go Eags!